The ground shook again, and Commander Sable Marin grabbed the edge of the metal table to keep herself standing. It was the fourth quake that morning, and each one came harder than the last, rattling the walls of the underground bunker they all called the Cradle. She looked around the command room, at the tired faces of her officers, at the flickering lights above them, at the cracked screens that showed nothing but bad news, and she felt the weight of 4,300 lives pressing down on her shoulders like a mountain. Kareth 4 was dying. Everyone knew it, and no one could stop it. 2 years ago, a rogue brown dwarf had entered the star system and begun pulling at the planet from deep space, twisting its core, breaking its bones from the inside out. The ground split open in new places every day, spilling rivers of bright orange lava across what used to be farmland and mining towns. The air above the surface was thick with ash and dust, poison, and the sky had not been blue in over a year. The evacuation order had come too late, and the last transport ship that tried to reach them had been torn apart by debris in orbit. After that, no one else came. No government, no military fleet, no rescue mission. Just silence from the stars. So the survivors dug deeper into the earth, built walls of scrap metal and stone, sealed their tunnels, and kept breathing because that was all they could do. Sable Marin had not been a colony leader before all of this. She had been a Navy officer, decorated and disciplined, stationed on Kareth 4 for what was supposed to be a quiet retirement post. Now she was the one who rationed food, settled disputes, organized patrols, and told children that everything would be okay, even when she did not believe it herself. She was tired in a way that sleep could not fix, but she kept moving, because if she stopped, others would stop too, said a voice from behind her, and she turned to see Dr. Arav Mishra walking quickly toward her with a datapad in his hands and a strange look on his face. Mishra was the colony's linguist and communication specialist, a thin man with kind eyes and a mind that worked faster than most computers. He was also the only person on Kareth 4 who still smiled when he found something interesting, which made him either the bravest or the strangest person in the cradle. "We picked up something on the long-range array," he said, holding the datapad out to her, "and it is not human." Marin took the datapad and stared at the waveform on the screen. It was a repeating signal, structured and deliberate, broadcasting on a frequency that no human technology used. "What is it?" she asked. "A distress call," Mishra said, and his voice carried a mix of excitement and fear that made the room go quiet. "An alien distress call, Commander, a real one, using a mathematical pattern I have never seen before, but which follows universal logic structures we theorized about back on Earth." Marin looked at him for a long moment, then looked at the datapad again. "Where is it coming from?" she asked. "The northern volcanic plateau," Mishra replied. "About 200 kilometers from here, and the signal is weak, which means whatever sent it is damaged or running out of power." The room erupted into noise. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them were quiet about it. Some said it was a trap. Others said it was a glitch in the equipment, and a few said they did not care because they had bigger problems, like the planet falling apart under their feet. Sergeant Kyo Tanaka, the colony's head combat medic, leaned against the wall, with her arms crossed, and said nothing. But her eyes were sharp and watchful. Bryn Alcazar, the heavy equipment specialist, who had kept the generators running for 2 years with nothing but spare parts, stood near the back, arms folded, parts and stubbornness, wiped grease from her hands, and looked at Marin with a raised eyebrow. "You are thinking about going out there," Bryn said, and it was not a question. "Someone is asking for help," Marin said simply. "Someone who is not human," one of the militia officers countered, "on a planet that is about to kill all of us." "That does not change what the signal is," Marin replied, and her voice was calm, but carried an edge that made people listen. "It is a call for help, and we are the only ones who can hear it." "We cannot even help ourselves," another voice shouted from the back. Marin let the noise continue for a few seconds, then raised her hand, and the room fell silent, because when Sable Marin raised her hand, you stopped talking. "I hear you," she said. "I hear all of you, and I know what we are facing. I know the ground is breaking. I know our food will not last forever. I know that no one is coming for us, but I also know who we are." She paused and looked at every face in the room. "We are still human," she said, "and if someone is calling for help, we answer. That is not negotiable. That is not something we vote on. That is who we are, and the day we stop answering is the day we are already dead." No one argued after that. Not because they agreed, but because they knew she was right in a way that went deeper than logic. Marin assembled her team within the hour. She chose Mishra for communication and translation, Tanaka for medical support and combat readiness, Bryn for technical expertise, and a squad of 12 volunteer militia members who stepped forward without being asked. They loaded up on supplies, sealed their suits against the toxic air, checked their weapons, and gathered at the main tunnel exit. The heavy blast door groaned open, and the heat hit them like a wall. Outside, Kareth 4 looked like a vision of the end of the world. Red, choked with ash clouds that flickered with lightning. The ground was cracked and uneven, glowing orange in the deep fissures where magma pushed up from below. In the distance, a volcano that had not existed 3 months ago was throwing fire into the sky. 200 kilometers across that, Tanaka said quietly, looking out at the hellscape. "Better start walking," Marin replied, and she stepped out first, because that was what leaders did. They moved in a tight formation, picking their way across broken ground, dodging steam vents and unstable rock, using handheld sensors to find safe paths through the destruction. Every few minutes the ground would shake, and they would freeze, wait, and then keep going. Mishra monitored the alien signal on a portable receiver, adjusting their course as the signal grew stronger. "It is definitely artificial," he told Marin as they walked, "and it is definitely a distress beacon. The mathematical structure is too precise to be anything else. Whoever sent this wanted to be found." "Then we will find them," Marin said. Hours passed, and the landscape grew worse. They crossed a field of hardened lava that cracked under their boots, climbed over ridges of shattered rock, and skirted the edge of a canyon that had opened up so recently the sides were still glowing. 2 militia members suffered minor burns from a sudden steam eruption, and Tanaka patched them up without slowing the group down. Bryn carried extra equipment on her back, without complaint, her broad shoulders built for exactly this kind of punishment. As night fell, the sky did not get darker so much as it shifted from red to a deep, angry orange, lit from below by the planet's dying fire. They made camp in the shelter of a collapsed ridge, eating ration bars and drinking recycled water, saying little because there was little to say. Marin sat apart from the group and looked up at the sky, searching for stars through the ash, but finding none. Somewhere out there, someone had called for help, and she had answered. She did not know what they would find at the end of this march. She did not know if it would save them or doom them faster. And she did not know if she was leading her people toward hope or toward nothing at all. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would rather die walking toward someone who needed help than die hiding underground waiting for the end. And somewhere far above, in the cold black emptiness between the stars, something else had heard the signal too. Something with dark ships and sharp teeth and no intention of offering rescue. But Marin did not know that yet. She only knew the next step, and she took it. They found the ship on the second day, half buried in a field of black volcanic rock, and it was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. It was not built from metal or plastic, or anything that human hands had ever shaped. The hull was made of something that looked like crystal, pale blue and slightly transparent, cracked in dozens of places, but still faintly glowing from within, as if the ship itself was alive and breathing its last breaths. It was beautiful even in destruction, elegant and curved like something grown rather than built. And the humans stood in silence for a long moment, just staring at it, because this was the first proof any of them had ever seen that they were not alone in the universe. "That is real," Bryn whispered, and her voice carried a kind of awe that no one had heard from her before. "That is actually real." Commander Marin broke the spell by stepping forward and giving orders. She posted guards around the perimeter. Bryn began scanning the hull for structural integrity, and took Mishra and Tanaka with her toward what looked like an opening in the side of the ship, where the crystal had shattered inward. The interior was dark and filled with a strange sweet smell, like flowers mixed with electricity. Emergency lights pulsed in soft blue along the floor, leading deeper into the wreckage. They followed the lights with weapons drawn, stepping over broken panels and shattered containers that had spilled their contents across the tilted floor. Then they heard it, a sound that was not quite a voice and not quite music, something between a hum and a cry, coming from a chamber at the center of the ship. Marin pushed open a cracked door and found them. 7 beings, huddled together in what must have been the ship's main cabin, and the sight of them stopped Marin in her tracks. They were tall, taller than any human, with 4 arms and skin that was almost see-through. Beneath that skin, she could see glowing lines of light that pulsed and moved like rivers of blue and silver, their circulatory system visible and luminous. Their faces were long and narrow, with large dark eyes that reflected the emergency lights. And they made that humming sound together, a sound that Marin realized was not a song, but a prayer. 3 of them were lying down, clearly injured, their glow dim and flickering, while the other 4 crouched around them protectively. When the humans entered, all 7 of them reacted with instant terror. The 4 who could still move pressed themselves backward against the wall, their forearms raised in gestures that needed no translation. And their humming turned sharp and high like a scream. "Easy," Marin said, lowering her weapon and holding up her empty hands. "Easy, we are here to help." They did not understand her words, but they understood her hands, her posture, the way she crouched down to make herself smaller and less threatening. Mishra moved quickly to a device on the floor near the injured aliens, a cracked rectangular object that flickered with symbols. "This might be a translation unit," he said, and he began working on it with careful hands, connecting it to his own datapad, feeding it samples of human speech while it fed him samples of theirs. It took 20 minutes, 20 long and tense minutes, during which the aliens watched them with those enormous dark eyes, trembling, waiting to see if these strange small creatures with only 2 arms had come to save them or to finish what someone else had started. Then the device crackled, and a voice came through, flat and mechanical, but understandable. "Please," it said, translating the words of the tallest alien, who had stepped slightly forward from the group. "Please do not harm us. We are diplomats. We carry no weapons. We are of the Valerian Compact." "My name is Sable Marin," the commander replied, slowly, letting the device translate. "We are humans. We received your distress signal. We are here to help you." The tall alien stared at her, and his glow pulsed brighter for a moment, which Mishra would later learn was a sign of extreme emotion among the Velarin. "I am Envoy Sorathal," the alien said through the device, "and I do not understand. What are humans? We have no record of your species in any Accord database." "That is a long conversation," Marin said, "but first you have wounded, and we have a medic." She gestured to Tanaka, who stepped forward with her medical kit and knelt beside the nearest injured Velarin. What followed was something that horrified the aliens and fascinated them in equal measure. Tanaka examined the injuries with quick, practiced hands, alien anatomy that she had never seen before, biology she had never studied, and physiology that did not match anything in her training. But Kyo Tanaka was the kind of medic who did not need a textbook to save a life. She assessed the damage by sight and touch, found the bleeding by following the glow, improvised bandages from sterile wrapping, used a bone-setting technique meant for human femurs on something that was not quite a bone, but served the same purpose, and administered a mild human painkiller after testing a tiny dose on the alien skin and watching for a reaction. Sorothal watched all of this with an expression that shifted from fear to confusion to something that looked very much like wonder. "Your healer," he said to Marin. "She has never treated a Velarin before." "She has never seen a Velarin before," Marin confirmed. "And yet she acts without hesitation. That is what she does." Tanaka looked up from her work and gave Sorothal a small nod. "They are going to be okay," she said. "The injuries are serious but stable. I need better supplies, but for now, they will live." Sorothal lowered two of his forearms in a gesture that the translation device identified as deep gratitude, and then he began to talk. And what he said changed everything. The Velarin were a diplomatic species within a vast interstellar coalition called the Galactic Accord, a union of thousands of worlds and hundreds of species that governed most of known space. Sorothal and his crew had been carrying something critical, a sealed treaty document, the only copy of a peace agreement between two of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. The first was the Drathan hegemony, a militaristic empire of reptilian beings who believed that strength was the only law. The second was the Umari Collective, a hive-mind federation of insectoid beings who moved and thought as one. These two powers had been at war for decades, a war that had killed billions and burned entire star systems to ash. And the treaty was the fragile thread that held a new ceasefire together. But someone had attacked the courier ship, someone with advanced weapons and inside knowledge of the route, and shot them down over this dying planet. If the treaty did not reach the neutral station called Concord Nexus within 40 standard cycles, the ceasefire would collapse, and the war would begin again, a war that would consume the galaxy. "You are telling me," Marin said slowly, "that you are carrying the one thing that stops a galactic war, and someone tried to destroy it." "Yes," Sorothal said, "and no one in your accord sent help when your signal went out." "The signal was sent on emergency channels, but this planet is remote, in a quarantine zone. No accord vessel would willingly come here." "Quarantine zone," Marin repeated, and she looked at Mishra, who was already frowning. "Why is this area quarantined?" Mishra asked. Sorothal hesitated, and his glow dimmed in a way that suggested discomfort. "Because of you," he said quietly. "Because of humans. Your species was classified centuries ago as a Death World civilization. Threat level absolute. Your world and all your colonies were sealed behind a quarantine boundary. No contact permitted, no communication allowed." The room went very still. "You locked us out," Marin said, and her voice was not angry, not yet, just flat and careful. "The Accord determined that your species was too dangerous," Sorothal said. "Too aggressive, too adaptable, too unpredictable. The decision was made before my time. I only know what the records say." "And what do the records say?" "That humans should never be contacted under any circumstances." Sorothal paused. "And yet here you are, and you came because you heard us calling for help. This is, I do not have the word, this is something that has no precedent in Accord history." Marin stood up and looked at her team. Tanaka was still tending to the wounded. Mishra was processing everything with that fast mind of his. Bryn had come inside and was already studying the ship's engine compartment with hungry eyes. Outside, the ground shook again, reminding them all that this planet had no intention of waiting for anyone. "Sorothal," Marin said, turning back to the alien envoy, "your ship is destroyed. Your people are hurt, and you have a deadline that the galaxy depends on. Is that correct? That is correct, he said. Then we are going to help you deliver that treaty. Sorathal's glow flared bright, and the translation device struggled for a moment before finding the right words for what he said next. You would do this, even though your own world is dying, even though we are strangers, even though my people locked yours away in fear. Especially because of that, Marin said, and there was something in her voice that made even the alien understand that this was not a negotiation. From deeper in the ship, Bryn's voice echoed through the broken corridors, carrying that particular tone she used when she had found something interesting. Commander, you need to see the engines. I cannot fix this ship. But I can build something out of the pieces. Something ugly and loud and not at all elegant. She paused, and when she spoke again, there was a grin in her voice. Something human. And far above them, beyond the ash clouds in the dying sky, a squadron of dark warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and began scanning the planet below, searching for a signal, searching for a treaty, and they were not coming to help. Bryn Alcazar stood knee-deep in alien wreckage and grinned like a child who had just found the greatest toy in the universe. The Valeran ship's engine was a thing of beauty, even broken, a crystalline lattice that bent light and folded space using principles that human science had only dreamed about. It was elegant and precise, and completely shattered beyond any hope of proper repair. But Bryn did not do proper repair. She did impossible repair. Here is what I need, she told Commander Marin as they stood in the wrecked engine room. I need every welding torch, every sheet of hull plating, every generator coil, and every roll of sealing tape we have back at the cradle, and I need the people who know how to use them. You are going to build a ship, Marin said. I am going to build a terrible ship, Bryn corrected her. I am going to take this alien crystal drive and shove it inside a frame made of mining equipment and cargo hauler parts, and whatever else I can bolt together. And it will be the ugliest thing that has ever flown, but it will fly. Marin sent word back to the cradle, and within hours, the full resources of the surviving colony were moving toward the crash site. 4,300 people had been waiting to die, and now they had something else to do. Something that felt like purpose, and purpose was more powerful than food or water or sleep. The Valeran engineers watched the humans work, and their reactions shifted from confusion to horror to a kind of reluctant fascination. Human construction methods were, by Valeran standards, barbaric. Where the Valeran grew their ships from carefully cultivated crystal matrices over months of patient calibration, the humans welded steel plates together with sparks flying, hammered components into place with actual hammers, and sealed gaps with adhesive tape and chemical sealant. Sorathal stood beside Marin and watched Bryn use a mining drill to bore mounting holes into a crystal resonance coupler that had taken Valeran artisans 3 years to grow. This is painful to observe, Sorathal said quietly. It is working, Marin replied. That does not make it less painful. One of the Valeran engineers approached Bryn and tried to explain, through the translation device, that the crystal lattice required precise harmonic alignment, and could not simply be forced into position with mechanical tools. Bryn listened patiently, nodded, then picked up a rubber mallet and gave the crystal a firm tap in exactly the right spot. It hummed, glowed brighter, and locked into alignment. The Valeran engineer stared at her with all 4 arms hanging limp at his sides. This should not work, Sorathal said, watching from across the construction site. It does not have to be pretty, Bryn said without looking up. It just has to fly. They called the ship the Adamant, a monument to human stubbornness, a hybrid nightmare of alien crystal and human iron, held together by engineering genius and sheer refusal to accept the impossible. The frame was built from the structural beams of mining rigs. The hull plating came from cargo containers. The life support system was cobbled together from 3 different colony backup units, and at its heart sat the Valaran FTL drive, wrapped in human steel like a diamond set in concrete. It was enormous and crude, and radiated energy signatures that made the Valaran instruments scream in protest. It was the most human thing ever built. But while Bryn and her teams raced to finish the adamant, the other clock was ticking faster. The Draythan had arrived. Warlord Vreth commanded the hunter-killer squadron from his flagship in orbit, and he had sent his elite ground forces, the Scale Cloaks, down to the surface to find the treaty and destroy it. The Scale Cloaks were everything the stories said and worse, tall reptilian soldiers in adaptive armor that shifted color with their surroundings, armed with plasma weapons that could melt through rock, trained to hunt and kill with mechanical precision. They landed in drop pods that punched through the ash clouds like burning fists and hit the surface hard enough to crack the ground. There were 200 of them, and they moved fast. Marin had been expecting something like this ever since Sorithal had told her about the ambush, and she had prepared. She did not have advanced weapons, or alien technology, or superior numbers, but she had something the Draythan did not expect. She had 4,000 humans who had been surviving on a dying planet for 2 years, who knew every crack and tunnel and lava flow on this part of Kareth 4, and who were very, very angry. "They think they are hunting us," Marin told her militia commanders in a briefing held in a half-collapsed tunnel. "Pray, this is our ground, and we will make them bleed for every step." The guerrilla campaign that followed was brutal, creative, and utterly bewildering to the Draythan. Human fighters used the planet itself as a weapon, luring Scale Cloak squads into unstable zones, and then triggering controlled detonations that collapsed the ground beneath them. They rigged tunnels with mining explosives and buried charges. They set traps using pressurized steam vents. They used reflective panels to blind the Draythan thermal sensors, and they attacked in fast, savage strikes before melting back into the smoke and ash. The Scale Cloaks had conquered worlds. They had crushed rebellions. They had broken the defenses of species far more technologically advanced than humans. But they had never fought anything like this. These creatures were small and soft and fragile. They had no armor worth mentioning, and weapons that were primitive by galactic standards. Refused to stop. They refused to run. They refused to die quietly. Every time the Draythan secured a position, the humans would appear from a direction that should have been impossible, hit them hard, and vanish before they could respond. Warlord Vreth, watching the reports from orbit, felt something he had not felt in a very long time, something that took him several minutes to identify, because it was so unfamiliar. It was uncertainty. "What manner of species is this?" he demanded of his intelligence officer. "Unknown, Warlord. They are not in any Accord database. They appear to be native to the quarantine zone. They fight like cornered predators. They fight like something worse than that, Warlord. They fight like something that enjoys it." The worst battle came when the Draythan found the cradle. A Scale Cloak force breached the outer tunnels and pushed inward, and for a terrible hour it looked like they would reach the construction site where the adamant was being built. Sergeant Kyo Tanaka took command of the rearguard defense. She was a medic first and a soldier second, but in that hour she was both at the same time, pulling wounded fighters to safety with one hand, and firing a salvaged plasma rifle with the other. The tunnel fighting was close and vicious and loud, humans and Draythan killing each other in the dark at arm's length, and Tanaka held the line with 30 volunteers against a force 3 times their size. She used medical knowledge as a weapon, targeting the Draythan at the joints where their armor was thin, aiming for the vulnerable spots that she had identified while studying the bodies of fallen enemies with a medic's eye for anatomy. When the Draythan finally pulled back, they left 40 of their soldiers behind. The humans had lost 12. Each one of those 12 names hit Marin like a physical blow. But she did not have time to grieve. Not yet. Not while. There was still work to do. While the fighting raged, Dr. Mishra made a discovery that shook him to his core. He had been given access to the Valerian ship's data archives, searching for anything that might help them. And deep in the classified diplomatic files, he found the full record of humanity's quarantine. It was not just fear that had driven the Accord to seal humanity away. It was calculated terror. The Accord scientists had studied Earth from a distance and cataloged everything: a world of extreme weather, tectonic violence, apex predators on every continent, diseases that mutated faster than they could be cured, and at the top of it all, a species that had not only survived these conditions, but had thrived in them, had conquered them, had spread across their world, and then reached for the stars, with a hunger that the Accord found deeply alarming. The quarantine report's conclusion was simple and devastating. Homo sapiens represents an existential adaptation threat. Their biological resilience, cognitive flexibility, and social aggression exceed all known parameters. Contact is not recommended. Containment is essential. Mishra brought the report to Marin, who read it in silence, while explosions echoed through the tunnels around them. "They were afraid of us," she said. "Terrified," Mishra confirmed. "They locked us out of the galaxy because they thought we were too dangerous." Yes. Marin looked at the report one more time, then handed it back to Mishra and smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been given permission to stop being polite. "Good," she said, "then let us give them a reason." 3 days later, the Adamant was finished. It sat on the shattered ground of Kareth 4 like a clenched fist pointed at the sky, ugly and scarred and thrumming with stolen power. 4,300 humans and 7 Valoran, packed inside it, crammed into every available space, holding on to anything bolted down. Bryn sat at the controls she had built herself, her hands steady, her eyes bright. "Everyone hold on to something," she announced over the ship-wide comm. "This is going to be rough." The engines fired, and the Adamant screamed upward through fire and ash, through Drathan weapons fire that scorched its hull, through the dying atmosphere of a world that had been their prison and their home. Behind them, Kareth 4 finally broke apart, the last great quake splitting the planet open like a cracked egg, pouring light and fire into the void. And ahead of them, the stars waited, and a galaxy that had never met humanity was about to find out why it should have been more careful about who it locked away. The journey through faster-than-light space nearly killed them all 3 times before they even reached their destination. The Adamant was never meant to be a comfortable ship, and in FTL it became something closer to a living nightmare. The hybrid drive screaming at frequencies that made human teeth ache and Valerian skin flicker. The hull groaning under stresses it was never designed to handle. The entire structure shaking so hard that bolts popped loose and had to be hammered back in, while the ship hurtled through folded space at impossible speed. Bryn Alcazar lived in the engine room during the entire transit, sleeping in 15-minute bursts on the metal floor, waking up every time the drive's pitch changed, adjusting, recalibrating, and sometimes just hitting things until they worked again. The Valerian engineers tried to help, but their methods were too slow and too precise for the chaos of the Adamant systems, and eventually they just stood behind Bryn and handed her tools when she reached out her hand, which she did constantly and without looking. Sorethal found Commander Marin in the cramped space they had designated as a command center, which was really just a cargo bay with screens bolted to the walls. She was studying star charts that the Valerian had provided, learning the layout of a galaxy she had never been allowed to see. "Tell me about Concord Nexus," she said. Sorithal settled into the space beside her, folding his forearms in a way that Marin had learned meant he was preparing to explain something complicated. Concord Nexus is the heart of the Galactic Accord, he began. It is a station the size of a small moon, built in neutral space between the great powers. A place where all species meet as equals, or at least pretend to. Hundreds of species live and work there. Thousands of ships dock at its ports, and the governing council of the Accord holds session in its central chamber. This is where the treaty needs to be delivered. Yes, before the full assembly, with witnesses from all signatory species. It must be presented formally, or it has no legal force. Marin absorbed this, and then asked the question that had been growing in her mind since Mishra's discovery. You said we were quarantined, locked away. Does anyone at Concord Nexus even know what a human looks like? Sorithal's glow dimmed slightly, which Marin had learned was the Valaran equivalent of an uncomfortable pause. There are records, he said carefully, old records from when the quarantine was established. But they are classified, and most citizens of the Accord have never seen them. To the galaxy at large, humans are a rumor, a cautionary tale told to young diplomats about what happens when a Death World species is allowed to develop unchecked. A ghost story, Marin said. Yes, Sorithal admitted. A ghost story. Well, Marin said, and something hard. And bright flickered behind her eyes. Ghosts are about to walk through their front door. The Adamant dropped out of FTL on the edge of the Concord Nexus system, and every alarm on the station went off at once. From the outside, the Adamant looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen, a jagged mass of industrial metal wrapped around a core of alien crystal, radiating unstable energy signatures, broadcasting on Valaran emergency frequencies, and scarred with plasma burns from the Drathan attack. Station traffic control sent 17 hailing messages in 12 languages in the first 30 seconds. Defense platforms rotated their weapons toward the incoming ship. 3 patrol cruisers broke formation and moved to intercept. And on every screen and sensor display across the station, operators stared at readings they could not explain, because the ship matched no known design, no known species profile, and no known energy signature in the entire galaxy. Database? Then Sorithal transmitted his diplomatic credentials. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The lost Valaran envoy, the one carrying the treaty that the entire galaxy was holding its breath for, was alive, aboard an impossible ship, accompanied by an unknown species from the quarantine zones. The panic that followed was extraordinary. Marin watched through the Adamant's forward view screen as the massive station came into view, and even she, who had thought herself beyond awe, felt her breath catch. Concord Nexus was enormous, a structure of sweeping curves and glowing spires that stretched across the void like a city floating in darkness. Its surface alive with lights and movement, ships of every shape and size coming and going like insects around a hive. This was the center of galactic civilization, the place where the fate of 1,000 worlds was decided, and she was about to walk into it with mud on her boots and a stolen engine in her. Docking was a tense negotiation that took 2 hours, during which station security insisted on scanning the Adamant 6 times, and Bryn insisted right back that if they scanned her engines one more time, the harmonic feedback would blow out their sensor array. They were finally allowed to dock at a quarantine berth on the far edge of the station, as far from the main population as physically possible. Marin assembled her delegation, herself, Tanaka, Mishra, and Sorithal. She considered bringing more people, but decided that 4 was enough. She was not trying to invade, she was trying to deliver a treaty. The airlock opened, and they stepped onto Concord Nexus, and from that moment, everything changed. The corridor they entered was wide and bright and filled with beings that defied description. There were species with too many legs, species with no legs at all, species that floated, species that seemed to be made of light, species encased in environmental suits of exotic gases, and species that looked like walking forests. All of them stopped when the humans appeared. The reaction was visceral and universal. Some froze in place, their alien eyes locked on the four small bipedal figures walking through the corridor with steady steps. Some backed away, pressing against walls and doorways. Some made sounds that the translation systems could not fully render, but which carried clear notes of shock and fear. Marin walked straight ahead, her posture military perfect, her face calm, her eyes taking in everything. Beside her, Tanaka's hand rested near her sidearm, out of habit. And Mishra murmured quiet observations about the species they passed, cataloging what he saw with a scholar's hunger. Word traveled faster than they walked. By the time they reached the central chamber where the Accord Assembly was in session, every being on the station knew that humans had arrived. Chamber was a vast amphitheater, circular and tiered, with hundreds of delegations seated in sections arranged by species, and at the center, a raised platform where speakers addressed the assembly. When Marin's group entered through the main doors, the noise in the chamber dropped to absolute silence. Thousands of alien eyes turned to look at them, and in that silence, Sorothal stepped forward and spoke. Honored delegates of the Galactic Accord, I am Envoy Sorothal of the Valarin Compact. I carry the peace treaty between the Drathan Hegemony and the Umari Collective. I am alive because of the beings who stand beside me. They are called humans. The silence lasted 3 more seconds, and then the chamber erupted. Voices shouted in 100 languages. Delegates rose from their seats. Translation systems overloaded and stuttered. And through it all, Marin stood perfectly still at the center of the storm. A faction within the assembly made their move. Almost immediately. Tall, thin beings with mirrored skin and cold voices. Representatives of what Sorothal would later identify as the Shadow Quorum, a hidden alliance of species that profited from galactic conflict. Their speaker rose and pointed at the humans with a long, gleaming finger. This is a quarantine violation, the speaker declared. These beings were sealed away by Accord law. Their presence here is illegal. The treaty they carry is contaminated by their involvement. We move to void the document and detain the intruders. Murmurs of agreement rippled through parts of the assembly, particularly from delegations allied with the Drathan. Marin looked at Sorothal, who nodded slightly, a gesture she understood perfectly. She stepped up to the speaker's platform. She had no prepared speech, no diplomatic training, no knowledge of galactic protocol. She had only the truth, and she delivered it the way she delivered everything, directly, and without apology. My name is Sable Marin, she said, and the translation systems carried her words to every seat in the chamber. I am not a diplomat. I am not an ambassador. I am the commander of 4,300 humans who were left to die on a planet that your galaxy forgot. She paused and looked around the chamber, meeting every set of eyes she could find. We heard a distress call, a call for help, sent by people we had never met, from a species we did not know existed, on a frequency we had never used, and we answered it. We walked across a dying world to answer it. We fought an army to protect the people who sent it, and we built a ship out of wreckage and willpower to bring them here. Her voice hardened. We did this while our planet was breaking apart beneath our feet, while your Accord did nothing, while your quarantine kept us locked away like animals, while your so-called civilized galaxy could not be bothered to answer its own distress signal. She turned to face the Shadow Quorum speaker directly. And now you want to arrest us for saving your civilization. You want to void a peace treaty because the wrong species had the courage to deliver it. She stepped closer, and the alien actually moved back. Go ahead, Marin said, and her voice was quiet now, but carried to every corner of the silent chamber. Try. No one spoke. No one moved. And then, from the far side of the chamber, A small delegation stood up, beings from a species that Sorothal would later identify as the Kelwari, a minor civilization that had been bullied and marginalized by the great powers for centuries. They stood, and they said nothing, because standing was enough. Then another delegation stood, and another, small species, forgotten species, species that had never had a voice in the accord, all standing in silent support of the humans who had done what no great power had been willing to do. Marin watched them rise, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt something she had forgotten she could feel: hope. But it did not last, because at that moment, alarms began screaming across the station, and the main display in the chamber switched to show the view outside. A Drathan war fleet, massive and dark and bristling with weapons, had just dropped out of FTL directly outside Concord Nexus. Warlord Vreth's voice filled the chamber, broadcast on every channel, cold and absolute. "Surrender the treaty and the humans, or this station burns. You have 1 hour." Marin looked at the fleet on the screen, then looked at Tanaka and Mishra, then looked at the thousands of alien faces staring at her in fear. She had come here to deliver a treaty. It seemed she would have to fight for it first. Concord Nexus had not seen war in over 300 years, and it showed. The station's defenses were built for peacekeeping, not for stopping a full invasion fleet, and the Drathan knew it. Warlord Vreth had brought enough firepower to crack the station open like an egg, and his ultimatum left no room for negotiation. 1 hour. Surrender the treaty and the humans, or burn. The Accord Assembly dissolved into chaos, delegates screaming at each other, some demanding immediate surrender, others calling for resistance, and a few simply trying to flee. In the middle of it all, Commander Sable Marin stood on the speaker's platform and waited for the noise to die down. And when it did not die down fast enough, she put 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled so loud that 3 nearby species clutched their auditory organs in pain. "Listen to me," she said into the sudden silence. "You can panic later. Right now, we have work to do." Next would be studied by galactic military historians for centuries, and none of them would ever fully understand how it worked. Marin took command, not because anyone gave her permission, not because she had authority, but because she was the only person in the room who was not frozen by fear. And in a crisis, people follow the one who moves first. She organized the station's scattered security forces into defensive units, assigned sectors, identified choke points, and established a command structure in less than 20 minutes. She pulled the human militia from the adamant and deployed them at the most critical junctions. 4,000 civilians who had survived a dying planet and fought Drathan scale-cloaks in dark tunnels, and were not even slightly impressed by a fleet outside the window. The volunteers from the smaller species who had stood for her in the assembly came forward, some with weapons, some with technical skills, some with nothing but the will to fight, and she found a use for every single one of them. "You do not need to be soldiers," she told a group of trembling Kelwari engineers. "I need you to be exactly what you are: smart, keep the power grid running, keep communications up, keep the lights on. That is how you fight." Sorothal worked the diplomatic channels, reaching out to Umari collective forces and begging them to send ships, but they were too far away, days at minimum, and the Drathan were already here. The first Drathan boarding pods hit the station 43 minutes into the ultimatum, 17 minutes early, because Warlord Vreth had never intended to wait the full hour. They breached the outer hull in 8 places simultaneously, and scale-cloak assault teams poured in, armored and armed, and expecting the kind of scattered, terrified resistance that they had encountered on every other station and world they had ever conquered. What they found instead was organized, furious, and waiting for them. The Battle of Concord Nexus was fought in corridors and maintenance tunnels and cargo bays, in the spaces between walls and underneath floors, in the dark and in the light, and it was unlike anything the Draythan had ever experienced. The humans fought the way they always fought, without elegance, without mercy, and without any intention of stopping. They learned to use alien weapons in minutes, picking up fallen Draythan plasma rifles and figuring out the firing mechanism by trial and error while under active fire. They improvised barricades from furniture and cargo containers, turned fire suppression systems into weapons by overloading them with chemical foam that blinded Draythan sensors, and used the station's maintenance drones as remote-controlled bombs. The alien volunteers fought beside them, inspired by a ferocity they had never seen and could not quite believe. A Kelwari technician rerouted power from non-essential systems to supercharge the station's internal defense turrets. A group of gaseous beings from a species called the Nethwen flooded an entire corridor with their own body mass, suffocating a Draythan squad that had no respirators rated for their particular chemistry. And through it all, the humans kept pushing forward, kept adapting, kept finding ways to win that should not have been possible. Sergeant Kyo Tanaka led the most audacious action of the battle. She took a strike team of 15 humans and 4 Valerian through an exterior maintenance corridor, crossed the hull of the station in emergency suits, and boarded the Draythan flagship through a waste disposal port that the Draythan had not bothered to guard, because no species in recorded history had ever been desperate or crazy enough to use one as an entry point. Statistically impossible, Sorothal said when he heard the plan. We do not do statistics, Tanaka replied, and then she went and did it. The flagship, her team, fought their way to the shield generator and destroyed it with mining charges they had carried from Kareth 4. Charges meant for breaking rock, that worked equally well on alien warship components. The flagship's shields dropped, and suddenly the most powerful ship in the Draythan fleet was vulnerable. Dr. Arav Mishra fought his own battle, one without weapons but equally decisive. Working with Valerian data specialists in a sealed communications center deep inside the station, he cracked the encrypted files that proved the Shadow Quorum's conspiracy. Financial records, communication logs, payment transfers, the entire hidden network that had arranged the ambush of Sorothal's ship. All of it documented in meticulous detail because the Shadow Quorum had never imagined that anyone would find it. Mishra broadcast the evidence on every channel available, every frequency, every network, deeming it to every ship in every world that could receive it. The effect was a political earthquake that shook the galaxy in real time. 3 Draythan vassal species immediately pulled their ships out of the attack formation, refusing to fight for a cause built on conspiracy and lies. The Accord delegates who had supported the Shadow Quorum suddenly found themselves scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. And across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the broadcast and learned the truth about who had really tried to destroy the peace. Bryn Alcazar delivered the final blow. She had returned to the Adamant during the battle, and while everyone else fought in the corridors, she had been working on the hybrid drive, pushing it past every limit, every safety margin, every sane boundary of engineering. She flew the Adamant directly at the Draythan command vessel, the one whose shields Tanaka had just brought down, and she overloaded the crystal FTL drive into a massive electromagnetic pulse that erupted outward like a silent sun. The blast disabled the command vessel completely, killed every electronic system on board, and sent ripples of interference through the entire Draythan fleet that disrupted their coordination for precious minutes. Bryn ejected 3 seconds before the pulse in an escape pod she had built from Valerian crystal and human stubbornness, and she tumbled through space laughing so hard that the rescue team who picked her up thought she had lost her mind. She had not lost her mind. She had simply done the impossible one more time, and it was funny to her because it kept working. With the flagship disabled, the conspiracy exposed, and their fleet in disarray, the Draythan assault faltered. But Warlord Vreth was not finished. He came to the station himself, in full battle armor, and he found Commander Marin in the central corridor near the assembly chamber. He was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, covered in scales the color of dark iron, and radiating the kind of predatory presence that had made entire species surrender just by looking at him. "I challenge you," he said through his armor's translator, "commander to commander, our tradition, single combat. The winner decides the battle." Marin looked up at him, this creature that was twice her size and built for killing, and she said one word: "Accepted." The fight was not graceful, and it was not long, but it was savage. Vreth had strength and reach and armor, and every blow he landed sent Marin staggering. She was faster, and she was meaner, and she fought dirty in ways that offended every Draythan code of honor, striking at joints, going for the eyes, using the environment as a weapon, bouncing off walls, and coming at him from angles he did not expect. He knocked her down 4 times. She got up 5. The 5th time she rose, bleeding from her mouth and her temple, one arm hanging wrong, her breathing ragged. Something changed in Vreth's eyes. It was not pity, and it was not contempt, it was recognition. He had fought 100 enemies across 100 worlds, and none of them had ever gotten back up that many times. He understood, in that moment, why the Accord had quarantined these creatures, and he understood that the quarantine had been both the wisest and the most foolish decision the galaxy had ever made. Marin hit him one final time, a blow that found the gap in his neck armor that Tanaka had told her about, learned from studying Draythan anatomy during the fighting on Karath 4, and Vreth went down to one knee. "Yield," Marin said, standing over him, barely standing at all. And Warlord Vreth, who had never yielded to anyone in his life, looked at this small broken creature who refused to die, and he lowered his head. "I yield," he said. The Draythan fleet stood down. The battle was over. Followed. The treaty was formally presented to the full Accord Assembly and ratified with more votes in favor than any resolution in Accord history. The ceasefire between the Draythan hegemony and the Umari Collective was restored, stronger than before, with new provisions for transparency and oversight to prevent the kind of conspiracy that had nearly destroyed it. The Shadow Quorum was exposed, its members arrested or fled, their networks dismantled. And the Galactic Accord, by unanimous vote, lifted the quarantine on humanity. Envoy Sorothal gave the address that would be remembered for generations. "We quarantined them because we feared what they would do if unleashed upon the galaxy," he said, standing before the assembly with his glow brighter than Marin had ever seen it. "We were right to fear them, but we were wrong about why. They are not a threat to civilization. They are its most stubborn, most reckless, most unbreakable defenders. They came to us from a dying world with nothing but their courage and their refusal to let anyone suffer alone, and they saved us from ourselves. The 4,300 survivors of Karath 4 were granted full refugee status and offered homes on any Accord world. Most of them chose to stay together, because after everything they had been through, they were not just survivors anymore. They were a family. Marin began negotiations for a new colony world, a place where humans could build again, and this time the galaxy would be watching, not with fear, but with something much more complicated. She stood on the observation deck of Concord Nexus late that night, after the votes were counted and the speeches were done and the wounded were bandaged, and she looked out at the stars. Tanaka stood beside her, arm in a sling, quiet and steady as always. Mishra was there too, already writing, already recording, already making sure the story would be told right. Bryn was asleep on a bench behind them, snoring loudly, because she had not slept properly in 6 days, and even she had limits. "We answered a call for help," Marin said quietly, looking at the endless field of stars that was now for the first time open to her people. "That is all we did. That is all we have ever done." Sorothal, who had joined them without being heard, placed one of his 4 hands gently on her shoulder. "That," he said, "is exactly why the galaxy needs you." And far away, in a university on a world that humans had not yet visited, a Valeran historian sat down to write the entry that would open every textbook for the next 1,000 years. The galaxy had known peace before, it had known war, it had known wonders beyond measure, but it had never known humans, and nothing was ever the same again.